former United Nations weapons inspector to Iraq and Marine Corps officer Scott Ritter appeared in a show in Dialogue Works YouTube channel and talked about, amongst other things, Ukraine's recent loss of an F-16 fighter. So let's jump over to the video and see if there's anything to what he's saying or if it's just the usual drabble. My name is Max Villman. I'm a former fighter pilot in the Swedish Air Force, and as usual, let's go. Yes, it was in this show on A Highway to Hell, one of a blog article that Scott Ritter wrote, that he got the question about what happened to Ukraine's first F-16 loss. Ukraine lost their first F-16 during a combat mission where the pilot had, amongst other things, shot down 3 cruise missiles and 1 Shahed attack drone. So let's see what Scott has to say about this incident.
This is meaningless. The only thing that matters isn't what comes out of his mouth, it's what happens on the battlefield. That's all that matters.
Yeah. And do we know, Scott, what was happened to that F-16 and that jet's crash? And who did that? It was on part of Ukrainians? It was Russians who did this F-16 or something else?
Well, we don't know with absolute certainty because nobody's talking about it in those terms. Initially, there was talk that the drone, the aircraft might have run into a Russian drone and suffered a malfunction, and so the Russians were like, we shot it down. And then the word came out, no, a Patriot missile shot it down. And then the Ukraine said, no, a Patriot missile didn't shoot it down. It was brought down through technical malfunctions, pilot error, things of that nature. So when you look at that and some other information, you can cobble together what I think is probably the most viable scenario. Yes.
Okay, so I think he's absolutely right here. We have a couple of different things that could have happened. One is friendly fire, so the F-16 getting shot down by its own air defenses, by its own ground-based air defenses, in this case Patriot missiles. Or it could have, as it was shooting down a drone, flown into the debris of that drone, because when you shoot something down, it stays in the air for some time. A lot of junk gets thrown around, so you can get that junk into the engine or otherwise and then crash. Or perhaps it could be something else, a technical malfunction, or the pilot flying into ground, a so-called CFIT, or controlled flight into terrain, which is unfortunately not uncommon, especially not when you consider the high-stress environment of doing combat missions and this pilot's relative inexperience when it comes to flying F-16s. They had only been flying F-16s for a couple of months, and prior to that, probably MiG-29s or Su-27s. So those are the most likely courses that could have happened. We know that the Russians have not claimed to have shooting down the F-16, so we can rule that out. So he's correct in that. Let's see what he has to say more.
The F-16s that Ukraine have are configured in air-to-air mode. They're not air-to-ground delivery systems yet. They're designed right now to be employed in a similar way that American aircraft, Israeli aircraft, British aircraft were deployed back in April to protect Israel from Iranian cruise missiles, drones, etc. Sort of a forward line of defense to visually or through radar or heat acquire a target and shoot it down with an air-to-air missile. The F-16 carries a combination of Sidewinder missiles, which are heat seekers, and AMRAAMs, which are radar missiles. And that appears to be the profile that he was flying on that day. Now, he is part.
Yeah, obviously that was the profile since he had been shooting down a couple of cruise missiles and attack drone before crashing, so that is correct. The jets, however, the F-16s that he's talking about, they can absolutely be configured in air-to-ground mode as well, because if you take a look at what they've gotten F-16 AMs in block 15 MLU, which is basically the equivalent of F-16CD block 50-52. So they are older F-16s that have been upgraded through a midlife upgrade program, so that they are approximately to the standard of the F-16 block 50-52, which also the many other countries use. So even though they are very, very old jets, they have been upgraded and can now employ several of the most advanced air-to-air missiles and several of the most advanced air-to-ground weapons as well. So even though they are old, they're absolutely not ancient or by any standards. They are very, very capable fighter jets for sure, and definitely a big step up from the MiG-29s and Su-27s that the Ukrainians have flown before. And if you go into Wikipedia, you can see all the details of what they have done here. So the correct term is the F-16 Block 15 MLU. And according to what we can gather from open sources, the Ukrainians have received a total of 6 F-16s so far, with one being crashing.
Part of the way they did it with Israel is that the aircraft flew forward of the surface-to-air missile umbrella, the Iron Dome, etc. So they were out of harm's way. You didn't have aircraft flying over Israel. They were flying into Jordanian airspace, so that there was automatic deconfliction. They would shoot down as many targets as possible, report incoming targets in, and then those would be engaged by the surface-to-air missile umbrella. Here, it's the opposite. The surface-to-air missile umbrella is forward. So the F-16 either acts as a backup to that, meaning that if the Russian missiles penetrate the air defense, it's there as a backup to intercept and shoot down, or it's trying to operate in coordination with, and that's a very tricky thing because now you have to have very intimate deconfliction, and it has to be trained. I mean, I used to be involved in this kind of work in the Marine Corps, and the level of training necessary to deconflict surface air missiles with aircraft it's a very tricky thing, and if it's done wrong, planes get shot down.
Well, he's true about that. It takes more training, more education, more competence to have joint engagement zones, JEZs, where you have fighter aircraft and ground-based air defenses operating at the same time. He's definitely true in that. The most simple way to deconflict is to have different areas of responsibility, AORs, where you have the GBAD systems, so the ground-based air defense systems, even if it's SAMs, surface to air missiles, or if it's the anti-aircraft artillery, AAA. That they have specific zones with specific altitudes. Either you make it altitude-wise, or you can also make it geographical, or combination of the both. And then you have the fighter jets in different areas of responsibility. That way, they're automatically very, very difficult to shoot each other down and deconflict. And blue on blue situations can absolutely happen, especially during these types of missions where you have the F-16s or MiG-29s or whatever hunting the cruise missiles and the Shahed attack drones basically at the same level as they are, and then trying to either fly in from behind and shoot them down, or coming from the front and shooting them down. So they are operating in the same kind of airspace where the ground-based air defenses would want to shoot down the cruise missiles, which makes it difficult to deconflict these kinds of things, and requires training. It requires very, very strict routines on how to hand off different targets. So he's true in that, but there's also in Ukraine, there are several areas where you have AAA, you have the trucks going around and hunting the Shahed drones with machine guns and AAA. So it's an integrated air defense system for sure, which also is something that Israel uses for sure as well. So he's true in that requires training, but you must also take into account that Ukraine has been doing this all along. They've used MiG-29s and Su-27s to hunt cruise missiles and Shahed drones during basically the entire war. So they have experience in that for at least 2.5 years now. So this is nothing new. It's just that the F-16s are new.
So we have a plane configured to air-to-air mode to engage targets, work in an environment where it has to maneuver to stay out of harm's way from a surface-to-air missile engagement. Well, I think, and also remember these are...
that's not necessarily true. It's not necessarily so that you employ the F-16s in this case in airspace where the Russian GBAD can also shoot into over Ukraine. What you can do is that you keep the F-16s back and you keep them on a lower altitude level, so they are not being threatened by Russian SAMs, so they don't have to basically care about them as much. Because these cruise missiles and these Shahed attack drones, they're flying very, very low, and you can also stay low when you hunt them down. So it's not necessarily so that they have a threat from Russian SAM systems as they are hunting this. It can be if they're close to the front, but usually they could wait for them to come into a bit further into Ukraine and then start to hunt them down. So it's not necessarily true what Scott Ritter says here, but let's see what he has to say more.
Very old aircraft. They've outlived their operational life. And that's the only reason why the Ukrainians have them. I've said this all along. They're not getting the best F-16s. They're getting ones that NATO literally is not allowed to fly anymore. Why? Because they've exceeded their operational life expectancy. They can't be upgraded. Why? Because after a while, metal becomes brittle. These planes were designed to take a certain stress load, G load. They were designed to do certain maneuvers. Now, when you put weapons on it, that increases the stress. It's just simple physics. It's the same. Spin something around, put a weight on it, spin around. There's even more stress on the string because the weight, the centrifugal forces, etc. So now you got this plane with things strapped onto it, pulling maneuvers. This pilot is not an expert pilot. He doesn't know the aircraft very well.
It is true that these are older F-16 jets and not the newest ones. However, I don't think at all that it's true that these have been going past what the manufacturer, I think it's General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin today, I guess, what the manufacturer says is okay to fly it. What you do is you do continuous inspections. The airframe is certified to a certain number of hours, certain number of G-load, etc. And then you go make inspections, and then you can get extra hours and so on and so forth. I absolutely do not think it's true that these jets are basically becoming brittle, that they are not having any more hours to fly before they are not being able to fly anymore. I don't think that's true at all. I don't think that's what happens. Why Belgium and Norway and Denmark have decided to replace the F-16s is, like Scott says here, that they are old, and the F-35 is like a huge step up. But it's not because if you pour money into something, you can still extend the life of it, and that's true for these F-16s that the Ukrainians have gotten. They absolutely have hours left to fly, and they're not being flown past their limits in that sense, like he's saying right now. So I don't know. He's obviously not a fighter pilot, so that's not what happens. And you usually have a G limit, 9 Gs, for example, in the Gripen, and if you go past that G limit, so if you pull like 10 Gs, for example, because of an emergency or whatever, then that requires extra inspections to clear the jet for future flying. So, yeah.
He knows how to take it off. He knows how to land it. He knows how to go left, right, up, down. But he isn't somebody that's actually practiced, a scissor S maneuver, to fall down and then hook over here to evade. He doesn't practice that. And the airplane he's flying can't handle it. Now,
I don't think that's true at all. Obviously, one of the first things you do when you fly a new airplane is that you focus on learning to operate the aircraft safely, like you said, so you taking off, starting, whatever. But then you also do air combat maneuvering, like 1 versus 1, BFM, basic fighter maneuvering, air combat maneuvering, all those kinds of things, because that sets you up to really control the airplane, that you get a good feeling for it, and it's not very, very intensive to do. You only need 2 airplanes. So you do basic flying, you do aerobatics, and then you do 1 versus 1. That's like the typical progression you do, and you learn the systems along the way. So I think these pilots have flown a lot of different scissors maneuvers and high G loads, etc. That's not very complicated to train. It doesn't take very long, especially not if you're coming from other fighter jets like these pilots are. So I don't know what he's talking about right here. It doesn't seem that he knows what he's talking about at all, actually.
He may have done something like that when he was flying MiG-29s and Su-27s. And this is what I said all along. The problem is when these pilots are going to be placed under stress, they go to muscle memory and they fall back on that which they know. They're not very good in the F-16. They don't know how to use it. He's up there in the sky. He's trying to intercept the target. He gets inside a Patriot umbrella. The Patriot launches. He has to now evade the Patriot launch because the Patriot's locking on him. We've listened to Russians do this. Su-34s, Su-35s operating in the area. There's audio tapes released by the Russians, and you can hear the G-force as the Russian pilot is pulling to get out, grunting as the grunt maneuver to get out because he's pulling G's. He's stressing that airframe. But these are new aircraft. They can handle it. This F-16 pilot's down there. Now, he was told, don't overstress the plane. Plane can only do so much. Long, slow turns, slow climbs.
That's just simply not true. The airframe that they've gotten, I don't think there's any G limit on them at all. So except the normal ones. So an F-16 can pull just as many Gs as a MiG-29 or Su-27, and probably they have better G suits, so they can withstand the Gs as the pilots more carefully, much easier than the MiG-29s and the Su-27. So I don't believe that at all. What is more likely is that there's a kernel of truth in this, is that as you are defending, if it happened so that the F-16 was fired at by its own Patriot missile battery and he was starting to evading, what's more likely is that he either he was in a stress environment. It was probably in the night because these attacks usually come at night. So it could have been that he flew into the ground. He didn't keep the checks on his altitude, which can happen. It's very, very easy to get disoriented at nighttime. But I would say it's easier to get disoriented in a MiG-29 and Su-27 because they have older avionics systems. The F-16 has a quite clear, even though the HUD head-up display is smaller than on the Gripen, it's a quite clear head-up display. So it's easier to get disoriented in a MiG-29 and Su-27, I would say. I haven't flown the aircraft, but I would say, or at least equivalent. So I don't think that's really a factor. Basically, it's a high-stress environment. Perhaps the Patriot battery shot at him and he evaded into the ground. That could be one thing, but I don't think that he evaded and destroyed his own airframe by breaking it apart mid-air because of G-forces. I think that's very, very unlikely. And if he did so, he must have over-G'd it very, very much, not because the airframe itself was too brittle or something like that.
All this, but don't do this because it will fall apart at the seams. And I think the Patriot got launched. He went into MiG-29 mode. He over-yanked the airplane, and the airplane fell apart in the sky. That's what I think happened because it makes sense. All the facts line up. It could have been something else. We won't know. In theory, there's an investigation that happens. But I don't see the Ukrainians pulling the pieces of this F-16 out of the ground, putting it in a hangar, reassembling it, coming in, X-raying it, trying to reverse engineer the problem to find out what happened. I just see them trying to sweep it under the rug because they don't want to admit that they were given a bunch of junk from the West and that it will never help.
Yeah, I don't agree that they were giving a bunch of junk from the West. Obviously, it's older stuff, but it's still a lot better than what they had before, and they are desperately wanting these kinds of airplanes. So it's not like the West is pushing them to the Ukrainians. So I don't think I don't think his analysis of this situation is correct at all, and I don't think it's very likely that the pilot overg'd and broke up the airframe mid-air. I don't think there's any facts to support that at all. There could have been that either the Patriot battery shot the F-16 down, or the pilot flew into debris and therefore had a technical malfunction and crashed or died because of the debris, or he somehow evaded or otherwise flew into the ground because it's at night. It's a high-stress combat mission. Things like this happen even during training, where there's much less stress than combat missions. And as you recalled from earlier of this video, he had previously shot down 3 cruise missiles and 1 Shahed attack drone, which basically shows that he had been during stress for a long time, and an active combat mission, and possibly at night as well. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and unfortunately when you fly high performance fighter jets like the F-16 or the MiG-29 or whatever, things do go wrong and people die. So that's just part of the job, unfortunately. But we will see. Perhaps there will come out more facts, and we will see if Scott Ritter actually was right or if he was wrong. I think he's wrong. But either way, let's keep a tab on it, and perhaps we will come back and make another video in the future. Thank you for staying till the end. I will end it here. Please give me a thumbs up and like the video if you liked the video, and please consider subscribing as well. And if you want to, please consider also to share this video with someone who you think will benefit from watching this video. That really helps this channel grow and makes us so that we can continue to make these kinds of videos in the future. Until next time, as always, fly safe.